Hello there. What is going on, everyone? We are going to be talking all kinds of awesome Star Trek Into the Unknown news, and joining me are Michael Gernes and Max Brooke. These are the amazing minds behind Star Trek Into the Unknown. You've seen them here before. We are going to talk all things Star Trek, and especially Glory and Zeal. Michael and Max, how are you both doing?
Good. Ready for winter to be over.
Oh, absolutely.
Here in the Twin Cities. So
Yes,
Yeah.
very much so.
I know I'm down here in Orlando, and it's very warm down here. I was sweating a little bit today, so maybe we'll trade places. I'll be heading up north and at the end of the month for Adepticon, so it'll probably be a little chillier up there. But yeah, I'd love
Probably
to
be really nice then, compared, you'll get some nice cool weather in. So
It'll be nice. It was kind of crazy cold here recently, and I know now why people move down to Florida, because my bones feel so much better when it warms up, and I now understand. But speaking of cold weather, let's talk about Cardassians and Klingons.
Yeah.
I don't know what they have to do with cold weather, but that's my makeshift segue. But so I have all kinds of questions for you. Glory and Zeal is coming out soon. Can you tell us a little bit about, for people who aren't familiar with Glory and Zeal, tell us a little bit about it and when we can expect it?
let me give you the segue first, which is that we know Cardassians like their sunning rocks.
Yes.
So they too enjoy warming up their cold bones. Anyway, there's the segue.
They would come down. They would come down to Florida for a vacation.
I have one for you that's a Klingon expression, which is like, in space, all warriors are cold warriors.
That's true.
It's a good one. But Glory and Zeal, yeah. So it is our upcoming Klingons versus Cardassians expansion. It continues the story of the spreading Dominion War. It introduces the Cardassian faction, some of their ships, some of their iconic officers, some familiar faces you love to hate, and some more sympathetic characters. And we also get to really dip into a bunch of the iconic Klingons, and get to really explore more of the Klingons, and also see the Klingons put the really big heavy hitter combat ship, probably the scariest offensive ship in the game so far. Mike, would you say that's fair?
It's in the conversation.
Wow, that's okay. Yeah. I like that. Having played a little bit with the Klingon ships we have so far, I do like their offensive capabilities, as long as they're pointed in the right direction. They seem to do fairly well. But no, that's all right. That's good talk for the Klingons. Let me. I guess, speaking of Klingons, do you guys have any favorite? What's your most favorite and/or least favorite Klingon? Any notable Klingons that really stand out in your minds?
Well, for me, my canned answer is always Worf, but if it's not Worf, I'd say my all-time Klingon is Martok.
That's a good one. Which Martok though? The real one?
Real Martok.
The real Martok.
Real Martok.
All right.
Although I do love the character that Martok's actor plays in Far Beyond the Stars, the concept artist.
Yes, that's a great episode.
There's a lot of great. I mean, that's the whole cast. Really, I mean, obviously, Avery Brooks really shines in that episode, but everybody. So there's so many members of the cast get to do a really cool, like, either on type or off type performance. But I love that concept artist character who's like, just hands them there, like, here's a weird bug monster I drew. Write a story about it.
It's fantastic. Oh no, that's a really good one. Okay, I've got to shift now, because again, this isn't only about Klingons. We also have Cardassians in here. Not the Kardashians, but the Cardassians. Do you have any? Oh, wait, did I steal your answer? Was that going to be your least favorite Cardassian? No. Do we have any notable Cardassians that we love in there? Because I've got a lot. I think I've always said Gulivek is one of my favorites. But I'm curious if any of you guys share any of my opinions on Cardassians. Do we have any favorites or least favorites?
Well, I'll say my favorite Cardassian is not in this product, actually, but is in our plans, and that's our favorite Humble Tailor.
Oh.
He does not appear here. this was focused on the war between the Klingons and the Cardassians, and although he has some vague attachment to that, that is not like his major area. And so he is in the plan at a later date in a more fitting place. But I'm excited. He's just great. Every scene he's in is great. Every episode that he appears in the title credits for is fantastic. He's always great.
I
like Mike's answer a lot too.
I love how you said in a more fitting place.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I see what you did there.
A more fitted place.
Yeah, I love that.
A more suitable place.
Oh, that's great. No, I love it because, I gotta wonder what would just a simple tailor really be able to even provide to the Cardassian.
Yeah, what would a humble tailor have to offer? But I think Mike's answer to this question is really good too. We were talking about this beforehand.
Oh, go ahead. What would?
Well, I mean, for me, the best and worst Cardassian in one is Gul Dukat.
Yeah,
I said best, most entertaining.
Oh,
and I think it's probably because, I mean, in a way, Marco Lemos the first Cardassian.
He was absolutely. Yeah. He was, and I think he was Gul Dukat's cousin in the extended lore, right?
Yeah.
Was it Masset?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's in that episode.
Yeah, I love that. But his delivery and his growth as Dukat is just so incredible. Yeah. And even in the earlier episodes, he's like, I'm rewatching Deep Space Nine now, and he's really only a supporting character in the first couple of seasons, and then once the war really starts, then you start seeing a lot more of him, and man, he can really steal a scene.
Certainly my favorite Star Trek villain.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I would say that about him, and I just, it's like they, this person is a template, and then they add other things onto that,
No, I think you're exactly right. I think Deep Space Nine did a lot of that. I think Armin Shimmerman with Quark kind of defined Ferengi culture, even though he wasn't the first, whereas Marco Lemo was the first. But in a weird kind of way. But there was so much that just defined an entire species, and I think it's really cool that you guys get to work on that. And Gul Dukat is in this expansion, as we can see on the cover art as well. And I mean, you'd have to. How could you do the Cardassians without Gul Dukat? Which is a very...
Gul Dukat.
Yeah, go ahead.
He was one of the most fun officers to design. His design is really interesting. It plays in unusual spaces, and we're not gonna show him off today, but he is just weird and fun, and he will always make your opponent like very aware of his presence.
Well, Max, I got news for you. I think he's already been spoiled on the website.
Oh, has he been spoiled?
Yeah,
great. That's fantastic.
With the negative victory points. I have him in my file here. I don't have the graphic loaded up to talk about, but I think the community's already seen him. We do know that he's kind of taking a bet on if you have negative victory points, and if you get those at the end of the game, they go away. So if his well-laid plans do work out, it does seem, and I'm saying it so you don't have to say it, but yeah, we have seen those already.
Good. I thought he had been spoiled, but then I couldn't remember if he was partly covered over in the promo image. I wanted to be safe.
Always a responsible behavior. But yeah, no, he does look very, very interesting. And I guess I would ask you like a little bit about the faction as a whole. Is that more of a Gul Dukat thing, or do you think that's more of a Cardassians as a whole, kind of with the well-laid plans and taking maybe gambles?
Well, so the gambling with victory points and negative victory points is a Cardassian thing, but Gul Dukat does it in his own way. And that kind of speaks to what Mike was saying about how he's kind of the template, but they also expand upon it. Because the thing about Gul Dukat, and one of the best things about Gul Dukat, is that he's an enormous hypocrite, and he is consistently self-serving, and he's kind of the anti-Worf, because Worf is like the most iconic Klingon in many ways, and he's also he's sort of a paragon of Klingons, or he lives up to the ideal more than a lot of the like Klingons who, like grew up and lived on Kronos their whole life do. A lot of them tend to be a little more practical about things, whereas he tends to sort of, he's like living the Arthurian, ideal of the Klingon warrior, right? Mm-hmm. Dukat is the opposite, because he knows, about the Cardassian ideals of service to the state, and he pays lip service to them, but he is always gonna pick himself first. He's always gonna put his own interests above Cardassia, even though he says he's doing things for Cardassia or for other people. He always puts himself first. And I love, Michael, we were talking a little bit about great Cardassian episodes, and we were talking a little bit about the episode where what was that one called? It was
Civil Defense.
Civil Defense, yes.
Attention Bajoran workers.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Wow.
And about how his old superiors knew that he would try to weasel out and not suffer the consequences of his actions. So even though, like, when he comes onto the station and he's trying to leave, there's a defense mechanism against his betrayal. And that's like such a great moment.
And the guy says, I knew you were a coward, but now is your opportunity to die like a Cardassian.
Oh my goodness. I do love the flashback episodes. They're really cool ones. And seeing it's weird because there are some times where, like, especially early off, they almost portray him like he's kind of decent, so it makes his villainous things kind of more pronounced earlier. He's like, oh, I didn't expect you would have been that bad. But we also do see, like, really, so many good Cardassians throughout the tours. I mean, I recently watched Duet. Amazing episode, right? I think anybody who's watched Deep Space Nine knows this episode. Yeah. And, in that contrast against Dukat and some of the other brutal Cardassians that we see, you have a lot of differentiating types, which is a really cool thing. And we're going to get a lot of different Cardassians in this because this is our first introduction to Cardassia with this expansion. And it's very interesting because they're not exactly a standalone faction at this point, right? From what we've seen, there's some sway with the Dominion. Is that so? Can you talk a little bit about how they're going to fit within the Dominion?
Yeah, definitely. So, we very much were thinking about the Cardassians and the Dominion. They are both factions that can stand alone, but the Dominion is also this, faction that is an aggregation of other groups. And so we knew the Dominion, and, Dominion doesn't have that many ships that we, have different ships that we've seen. And so we knew that the Cardassians and the Dominion we wanted them to be, good, solid, standalone, playable factions. We also knew that we wanted them to play together really well, because together, that's really where, the Federation starts to get into hot water, is when they are facing these two combined forces, and then they start really tapping their allies and the Klingons and the Romulans. But that's really where their back gets pushed against the wall. And then, of course, the Breen add to that later. But yeah, so we knew that they were going to need to play well together, and that in some ways that they were going to need to complement each other's strengths and weaknesses. So we very much designed these factions to be complementary to each other and to be very, very friendly to sort of using each other to fill in their weaknesses. So, the Dominion is fantastic on fighting ships. It has, it has the Jem'Hadar battlecruiser, which is, the Negvar, I think, is a good match for it. But, the Jem'Hadar battlecruiser is, to date, it's been the big, the big hammer.
Yeah, it's a beast.
The Cardassians don't have a big hammer like that in their fleets. I mean, just in the show, they don't. The Gaylor class is quite respectable in battle, but it's not a Jem'Hadar battlecruiser. But what it is more flexible. It's got more utility in other roles. It's just a really good all-rounder, which is kind of what the Dominion are missing, because they're all about these specialist ships.
Yeah.
And so the two complement each other really nicely. And that also is part of the reason we chose one of the other ships we did for the Cardassians in Glory and Zeal. Do you want to talk about that, Mike?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I thought you were asking me. I was like, yes, of course I do. But
Well, I think we're talking about the
Grumall. Is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I realized that might seem like a funny choice at first blush, because it's a freighter. It's relatively small, but I think there's a couple factors that went into that choice. We always look for variety. We wanted to make sure the Cardassians had more toys than just two copies of the same ship. And because this is a Star Trek game, And we've also had some experience from other, our past games designing ships that aren't strictly combat focused. We have some additional levers to pull. And so this ship kind of gave us it kind of led us down some different directions that also impacted faction design.
Okay.
And I think that's sort of what's interesting about that ship.
No, I think it's very interesting. I was kind of surprised when I saw it, but at the same time, I also think it's interesting because that's like the first time we see Cardassians introduced. We talked a little bit about Gul Maset, which was also Mark Alamo, and that first episode had O'Brien and it had the Phoenix and Benjamin Maxwell, and he was going on a rampage, and rightly so. By the way, another character I would love to see come to this game would be Benjamin Maxwell and the Phoenix. Yes, it definitely fits my play style. It's like, no, forget the mission. I've got to kill those Cardassians. Oh, that'd be really fun. So wish list, just add that to the, to the.
Yeah. We'll keep that in mind. That's a good suggestion.
But yeah, it was all about the Cardassian freighters that they were being loaded up, and they weren't defenseless either. Does the Grumall? I'm assuming it does have some weapons.
Yeah, it's got some weapons, enough to shoot back. It's definitely not combat focused, which I think you see that in the episode where it's introduced, which is Return to Grace. But what it does have is it's a support ship, and so it can be a troop carrier. And one of the things we decided is it's very efficient at mobilizing your away teams.
Yes.
It's very efficient at moving personnel around. It's a freighter, so it's also there to support other ships in the fleet. And so those are the roles that it's there to make your fleet more than the sum of its parts would otherwise be.
No, I think that's one of the things that this game does really well with. I remember looking at the rule book for the first time, and I think it's one of the I think it's this is it the specialist class that has the silhouette for an Oberth, which has always kind of been seen as not really a combat ship, and it makes sense because this game isn't all about combat. More questions about that later, but there are. Yeah. There's so many roles that you're playing. There's games that I've played where I don't even shoot, and that's a lot for me because I'm trigger happy. But but yeah, that's a really interesting thing about this, and it begs a question about doing R&D. You guys have cited a couple of episodes by name already, and obviously it lets me know you guys are going back and rewatching these episodes, a lot as you're working on these and as you're doing your, I twist my arm. Oh darn! I'll watch some more Star Trek.
Yeah. For work.
Yeah.
For work. I'll rewatch this show. Yeah.
but no. So one of the questions I have an interesting R&D related question. I was going to ask this later, but I'm gonna bump it up a little bit. When it comes into looking at stuff like a freighter, there were a lot of ships that got used, where they were doing physical models. This wasn't all CGI. They couldn't just dial up a ship. They used physical models for a lot of these. So when it comes into using commonly used ships, there were I'll cite the Bajoran freighter. It was the same as a Krasari freighter. It was the same base model as a Husnik ship, and the list goes on and on and on. When it comes to looking at a ship like that, now we're not really talking about Bajorans in this case, but from a design perspective, how do you say, all right, we like this ship, but do you have to go to Paramount with it, or do you just say what is it that we want to use this for because this fits the game the best? Or before I put words in your mouth, you answer the question. How do you approach a situation like that when the same ship is fielded across multiple factions?
Well, we have a lot of creative freedom.
Okay.
I think in the specific case you're talking about, and what's funny, I had not even pegged that specific ship as being reused in so many cases because they redressed it. They added parts and greebles, and so it didn't read that way to me when I was younger. So I think in a lot of cases, the base model is similar enough, but they do things with painting, they do things with redressing it, so you don't have to necessarily make a binary choice. But
I would say if I had to, it would go to whoever needed that ship, whoever was the most recognizable to have that ship in their fleet first.
No, that makes sense. I remember thinking once that, like, all right, if we ever saw Bajorans and then we also needed to see, a Husnik ship, or if we ever needed to see the Krasari or whatever, I'm like, well, would these ship packs kind of all be like a recolored version of like the same ship? Maybe that'd be, cheaper for production costs, but at the same time, like, yeah, I feel like, people might feel cheated after a certain amount of point. Like, I don't know if we're going to get into that much granularity on every single freighter from every single episode that ever showed up, but I think in the case of a freighter, I think that this freighter might have been used at least once or twice more. Not sure if it was always Cardassian, with the Griebling, but I mean, I think you made a good choice in this to kind of round out the Cardassians, because, like, I think Max, you said this also, they didn't have that many ships that were available, and so that's why the Dominion, kind of pairing them together, it makes thematic sense for the show. But I think that's a really cool direction to go with this. And yeah, it'll be interesting to me. I guess the next question I kind of want to boil into is if you're running Cardassians kind of as a standalone faction, if you're not running them with the Dominion, what does that look like? Because that obviously that has to change them, because, like you said, they're not going to have that hammer. But are they able to stand as their own faction?
Oh, definitely. Okay. So the Cardassians are really interesting, and they play differently alongside the Dominion than they do on their own. But they definitely, I mean, so for starters, you can take Cardassians as your main faction, and, if you've got some sway, you can pull in Dominion stuff. So you do have those options: Dominion characters, Dominion ships, etc. That's a very, like, important part of that. And Cardassians and Dominion have more, we really tried to build in those sway hooks heavily into the faction. The Federation kind of has small ties with a lot of different factions, but the Cardassians and the Dominion, like many lists, will have a little bit of sway just because you picked some iconic characters who have some sway. It's certainly not everybody, but it is very baked in around particular, like, pivot characters and those ideas, and that's something we're thinking about over the line of both factions as well. But so you do potentially have access to some of those tools going either way. But on their own, Cardassians are really, so they have a very solid all-rounder in the Gaylor. It's a ship that it is a good combat ship. It is it's got good utility. It's just generally pretty effective. I would say it feels a lot like a sort of, mid-sized Federation ship in a lot of ways.
Okay.
And it's got some pretty nice weapons. It is, impressive in that regard. But the big thing that makes the Cardassians really interesting is that they are very focused on the sort of the teams game. They have their directive gives them some unique options for that nobody else has. What have we spoiled on that? Check me on that.
I know that I think there was only one card that had been spoiled, and I don't think it gave us a whole lot as far as the teams specifically themselves. So.
All right, well then we'll just leave off and say look forward to more news about that soon. But we wanted Cardassian just to be sort of the faction of military logistics. They're not necessarily the greatest warriors. That's the Klingons and the Jem'Hadar, but they are really good soldiers. They are very disciplined. They're very effective in those capacities. They're good at suppressing, like, multiple targets. They're good at, so they're going to be a hard faction to outcompete on teams for different reasons than the Klingons and the Jem'Hadar.
Okay.
They've also got some pretty unique teams. Some of their teams are good generalists. Others of their teams are really kind of uniquely designed specialists.
I will piggyback onto that, and that while you were, I pulled up what had been spoiled already, and we do have a protect Cardassian interests card that does talk about it. It gives us the names of some teams. There's a military order team. There's a science ministry team, which sounds like they're probably less combat oriented, but there's also an Obsidian order team that is named. And we have those only by name, but apparently the Obsidian order must be very well connected and very secret.
The Obsidian Order team is definitely pushing the limits of team design in a couple of interesting ways.
Oh.
They're unusual, and they work in kind of a weird way. But I think they'll be really fun to use.
Mm.
And the military order team is sort of that, like, these are really, really efficient soldiers. And then especially combined with the Grumall, which makes it really efficient to deploy them, we've got that option for that too. So we wanted the Cardassians to feel kind of like, they're tough to beat in the ground game, because they have a lot of versatility of options there. And they're not as, they're not as all-round, their teams aren't as all-roundery as Federation teams, but they have some unique advantages that make them particularly difficult to deal with.
Okay, excellent. I'd like to shift a little bit. We've been talking about the Cardassians a little bit, but I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the Klingons as well, because, hey, we're getting our second Klingon expansion here. And as a lover of things Klingon, and I love it. We're getting another bird of prey, but we're also getting of course our first big flagship. But not only that, we're also getting some more officers. Can you talk a little bit about how this kind of rounds out the Klingon faction and like gives them different things that maybe they didn't have before?
Yeah, so I mean, there's the obvious. You get your capital ship, your big hammer. You get more officers. You get like more of the characters that I think people will recognize, and you get we tried really hard to make sure that the Klingons did have a mix of officers that could fill all the roles, but this gives you some additional options for science and diplomacy, I think. So you're just going to have more choices, and I think this really does round them out into feeling like they're a full faction with parity like the Federation or Dominion.
Excellent. I noticed one of the preview images was of Kurok, the warp specialist, who's was in the TNG episode with the metaphasic shielding and all of that, and Dr. Rega. Great episode for aliens. But it was nice to see like an episode that kind of focused on a Klingon who wasn't a warrior, who was the challenges they faced of being a scientist. I love that you included that, but I also love Martok and his design. He's been spoiled. You guys graced me with the ability to spoil him. He has an interesting ability that's that he has to be your Commodore to use. He's not as effective if he's sitting alongside, playing second fiddle to Gowron. Like he's got to be in charge, right? And that's I gotta say, like there's so much theme that you've put into this. It's very very cool.
The Commodore ability design space is something we knew we wanted to be able to play with from the start. But we didn't do that much with out the gate. But it is definitely something we're looking at more, especially as we head into the next planned expansion, which we may talk a little bit about more in a bit. But yeah, that's a design space we really want to explore, because it's such a good design space to play in, because it's inherently limited. It doesn't self-synergize. So if you have like multiple abilities in there, you don't have to worry about them stacking with each other. It also creates some great theme moments, like you're pointing out. Like, Gowron holds Martok back.
Yes.
Because Martok has some clever plan that's and then Gowron says, no, we're just going in and we're gonna knife him. And it's Gowron is great at what he does. He's great at like whipping people up and getting them ready to getting ready to start a war. He's not necessarily great at executing on that.
No, absolutely. And I'm assuming this is the real Martok and not the changeling. So
yes. Well, we have a whole campaign mission about looking for changelings.
I love it. No, that's fantastic. Cutting the
without
hand
a blood test.
Yeah,
you can never really be sure.
No,
Good point.
I'm pretty sure Martok was like the first one to do that while he was a changeling, so it was just the best way to like throw all suspicion off. It's like, well, I'm the first one. Yeah, I was the first one to start the test. course I couldn't be a changeling if I initiated the tests. So devious. I want to shift focus for a minute. Max, you were talking a little bit about sway. I had some questions about sway, and specifically about, there was an FAQ published, the rules were updated, and so the rules documents that are online have had the sway documentation now for a little while. Wanted to kind of touch base on that, and I'm going to pull up an image here. Specifically, the amount of sway that you have. Again, we've talked about it a little bit. This was something that was very, very helpful. I had some questions on this. Maybe we can isolate it a little bit, because there's some and or ors. So the different amounts of sway that you have with a faction kind of add up to this chart. And I guess my question was, if you can kind of talk us through sway a little bit, but specifically, like 3 and 4 seem like they're doing kind of the same thing to me, when I can either get a capital ship or a smaller ship, and then I can get 2 officers, whereas 4 says I can get any ship and 2 officers. What's the difference really between those, and anything else that maybe, kind of belongs in the discussion about sway? Can you enlighten us a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So and maybe, we can look at, maybe there's some graphic design improvements we can make here or something to make this a little clearer. Maybe we could put a box on a sub box or something, or a dotted line. I don't know. But basically, for option 3, your choices are select 1 capital ship from this faction, or your second choice B is select up to 1 scout, sword, or specialist ship and the 2 transfer officers. So if you take the ship for 3, or the capital ship for 3, you don't get the transfer officers. If you take the smaller ship, you do get the transfer officers.
So it sounds like each number is kind of like building. You can get everything you had before, or you can also get or you can get this next option, this better option.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So each one is, each one sort of built on the last one.
Okay. And these are, and so any officers you get, they go straight into the transfer pool. So you're not able to just assign them initially. You have to kind of pull them and spend flex points on them. So it's kind of you don't know if you're really going to get them or not, depending on how many officers you have in your flex pool.
Yes. You always have your, when you're building a transfer pool, like for an event, if you're running, if there's an event, everyone will bring a transfer pool of the specified size, which I believe is 5 officers. And you'll pull 2 of them and have the option to replace line officers with those officers.
And I think that's important. I realized, when we were kind of setting up these questions, this might be a no-brainer for some of the folks watching at home, but I realized that in a lot of my games, I never actually used the flex points for anybody, and I just made sure I spent all my points on the exact officers I was going to want. And I'm realizing that I can probably get a lot more effectiveness out of them. Maybe that's why I lose most of my games. I should probably, read the rules a little bit more, read the book.
Well, you definitely should consider using your transfer officers, because they can be a great asset. You can really get a really valuable officer on discount, and it can also be a good way. If your list is a little weak on something, or if your faction could use a shot in the arm on something, and you can get the sway to do it. They're a really good way to add a little bit of that. So if you make sure, let's say your list is a little weak on medical officers, you could pick 3 officers in your transfer who have at least a rank in biology, and as long as you pick 4, you put 4 in there into your transfer pool, and they're guaranteeing you'll get someone who's decent at it,
because you pull 2, right, for the
because you pull 2, so you're guaranteed, so as long as you put 4 in, you'd be guaranteed to pull 1 that has it.
And you can assign 1 or 2 depending on how many flex points you have, and you replace your basic line officer with those, right?
Correct. Okay. Yeah. So they're not giving you another officer, because that would be too powerful. We don't want to let you buy activations, but you can replace a weaker activation with a better activation.
No, and that's really great, and it's funny, and I don't know how many people, because this is a pretty rules heavy game, and I don't know how many people were similar to myself, in that there is just certain rules that they've just missed or just hadn't been taking advantage of. But that's definitely something I'm going to do in my next game, and now understanding the sway chart now a little bit more, it helps. Now we don't do the same thing for ships. We actually just select the ships, so the ship is more of a guaranteed choice, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, great. So I appreciate that. While I have the screen open, I'll switch back for just a minute. We have some additional spoilers that were just sent over that we can talk about. So for those of you watching at home, if you've stayed this long, you won't be disappointed. We have some spoilers right after a message from our sponsor. No, I'm just kidding. Let's jump right. That would be the time to cut to a commercial break, though. You know, where Gul Dukat appears on the main screen and then says like, "Oh, I'm afraid you won't be going anywhere, Commander Sisko." You know. All right. So the first one we're going to talk about, Kor. Now we had seen Kor a little bit, but his card was largely cut off. So, all right. Speaking, and actually this is a pretty good segue from Sway because he has a lot of skill points, right? He's got a lot of skills, but we'd really just be looking at the levels. So in this case, he would be what, 4 to add? 4. It rhymes with Kor.
He's a good deal for you know for 4 points replacing a line officer with him. It's a pretty good deal.
Oh yeah, because he would cost 13 normally, and he's 2 health like Klingons tend to be. So tell me a little bit about Kor here as I'm looking at it because you just sent these to me right before we started, so I hadn't even had a chance to really review him yet. So he's got a lot of different stuff. He's got mysticism, so that's very cool.
Kor is one of my favorite Klingons, and also because it's just so fun to see John Colicos and stuff. Because he was the Baltar in the original Battlestar. And so, and he's just such a great character. He's got such incredible energy, and he's this sort of like, he's torn by these like great passions, and like, I don't know, he's a great Klingon. He feels so Shakespearean. And of course, he's one of the original Klingons.
And he's literally a bard.
Yes.
He's a Klingon bard.
Yes. So we knew that, he needed to feel like he was making, like everybody else better, right? Because that's sort of his thing. Is he's not the like great of the Dahar masters. He's not like the greatest swordsman. He's not, the greatest tactician. He's the one who sort of like unites the group through story.
Yes.
And so, he has a very top-down design, and he gives all your other officers Qapla', which is just, especially to bring him into a Federation list, all of a sudden, it's just like, okay, I guess we're excited about fighting now,
Oh, and that doesn't have to be, you know what? As I'm looking at it, it doesn't have to be Klingons.
No, because Jadzia gets all excited, and so like excited about fighting, and so like Kor comes in, and now all of a sudden everybody wants to go prove themselves in battle because he's a great storyteller, and he he gets these great he inspires these great heroic feats, and then of course he himself has pretty good Qapla' effect, gaining discipline and skirmish, and that sort of reflects how whenever we encounter him, he's either on or he's just a total mess, and there's like no it's like one or the other. He's like either in a total stupor or he's like with it doing his thing. We see that in his original appearance. We see that in the quest for the sword of Kahless.
Looks like he's holding the sword of Kahless in this picture. Yeah.
And so we wanted him to like, he gets quite a bit better when he gets Qapla'. And then he also, of course, has inspiring as well. So he's also, so he's just like a nice splash into any list that can take him, especially as a transfer officer, because if you get him, he's awesome. But if you don't get him, you don't necessarily like absolutely need him for your game plan.
Yeah, and he's got a lot of abilities that are just good. All like Fieldcraft is good in so many places, right? Obviously, you want him going down to teams with skirmish. The other your author, when his ability, when it says each of your other authors gains Qapla' skirmish +1. Now, if they already have Qapla', this would stack, correct?
It would.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, and that's great. And they don't have to be in the same location as him. Is that true? So that he could be on a ship and they could be on an away team and they still benefit from it.
Yep. He just is blanket. As long as he's around, all your officers have that ability.
So he's on the communicator, inspiring them. And he's like, and don't forget to strike for the heart.
Exactly. And he's got a point of Federation sway, so he's great for grabbing, Jadzia or somebody else who pairs nicely with Klingons. So he's just a nice add in a lot of respects.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love it. And he can fill multiple roles as well. So overall, really nice. But I do see what you're saying about the, again, you're paying for him though if you at 13 points unless you're going to flex him. So I like that a lot. Very cool character. We have another one to talk about, and this is Gul Madred, one of the most infamous Klingons of all time. Absolutely love him. Dutiful 3, and I think dutiful is this a new keyword or is this one that we've seen already?
It is a new keyword.
Okay, so yeah, talk to me about Gul Madred already, because he has got some great keywords as well, and he looks like he is going to be banking negative victory points.
Yeah, so dutiful lets you bank negative victory points on the character. So when they lead an action that causes you to take negative victory points, you can put it on them instead. You'll still score it at the end of the game, unless they can bank a number up to their dutiful value. You'll still score it at the end of the game unless they are lost or incapacitated.
Oh, it would be a shame if I sent him on that away mission right before before he was lost.
Well, it's as what's the line from, is it the Wire episode, Mike, where what is it? It's like the line about the dying in service to the state.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the highest Cardassian virtue, is sacrifice to the state.
Oh my
Yes.
goodness.
So,
I love that. That's a really cool keyword. I really like that.
Madred is kind of the opposite of Ducat, because Madred is also despicable, but Madred is a true believer. Ducat is just all about Ducat, right?
Mm.
Like, at the end of the day, he'll say or do anything to promote himself and avoid consequences for his many terrible actions. But Madred, as we see him at least, truly believes in Cardassia and is sort of willing to do any awful thing for it. Still terrible person, but a much more principled one. He actually believes in things other than himself. And in fact, he sort of believes in things to the point of subsuming himself in that,
Mm-hmm.
and that makes him scary in a different way. And a great foil to Picard, who's also an idealist, because they're both idealists. They're just they have very different ideals.
Also, both Shakespearean actors.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh no, I love it. That's a really cool. He's going to be a fun one to use. I really like that. That's very, very nice. Pitiless Interrogator is his name too. Did you guys have fun coming up with? Do you guys have fun coming up with like the subtext and the names for these guys?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
A lot of fun.
I imagine. Like, have you ever had like contests in the sea, like where like was there any like names that were like on the chopping block that was like, oh, I want it to be this, but I really want it to be that, and then like you kind of have to play darts to see who wins.
I'm trying to remember. We've gone through some gyrations. We're usually pretty much in agreement. Like, I think I think more often, like, one of us will have taken a first pass on it. We'll have written like 10 that day, and like the 10th one won't be that great, and the other person will come in and say like, oh, what about this other thing? And then we'll be like, yeah, that is a better idea.
Very
Cool.
No,
but yeah, no, I think we've had a lot of practice on it. I mean, other minis games we've worked on have done the same thing, and so
I'm curious what you'll put for Mott the Barber if we ever do see Mott the Barber.
Well, I mean, I think the answer is the Barber, Mott the Barber.
I would probably say opinionated barber.
Ooh, I like that. Yes,
the
barber with opinions.
I remember from the old Decipher Star Trek card game that we had a Mott the Barber character there, and he had a skill called barbering. I don't think it was ever used. It maybe at least not when I stopped playing. But like I loved that they put it in there as almost like a joke character. But
Yeah.
do you guys have any?
What?
Oh, go ahead.
I was one of the things about our system that we did look at the Decipher game, and we didn't go as hyper specific as they did, but we could do a barbering skill, and if we put it in a particular skill category, it would actually still grant a benefit to certain actions, even if there was nothing that made you roll a barbering test.
No, absolutely. It could just be like a generally socialization as well, too. or small talk.
He could have like barbering and small talk, and barbering, if he's got like barbering 1, that's a technical skill. He's better at powering up the warp drive. So
all right. I wanted to talk obscure characters with you guys too, and then you just made me think of one when you mentioned small talk. There was an episode when it was where Tuvok was on Next Generation. He wasn't playing Tuvok though; he was playing a different Vulcan. And they beamed down, and there was a commander that was going up to everybody. It was one of the first times Data tried to imitate this guy, and I can't recall the guy's name at the moment, but he would be talking to Riker, and Riker was like, "Oh my gosh, this guy's killing me with small talk," and he keeps trying to pawn this commander off on somebody else, and I think he eventually got shot at the end of that episode, but I could easily see small talk or socialization as being kind of a skill. I could see Loaxana Troy using that. But all of this to say, do you guys have any like deep cut characters that would be like real fun, like pleasure projects for you? Because I remember there was another interview I heard that you guys gave, and I think Michael, it was you that brought up Roga Danar, and I was like, well, that's such a deep cut. That's a really cool one. like, do we have any other like deep cut characters that would just be like fun, that maybe don't really actually belong in the game, but like would be kind of a passion project, or it would be kind of things? Or did I already hit the nail on the head with Mott the Barber?
Well, I think for me, I really like a lot of the Federation like guest characters,
Okay.
other Federation officers. So like, people like Captain Jellicoe.
Oh, yes.
I suddenly I'm blanking on the name, but like in the episode The Pegasus, Riker's old commander, who's an admiral.
Pressman, Eric Pressman.
Yeah. I love those kinds of characters, and like they're kind of deep cut because some of those they're just one single appearance people, but that's the kind of stuff I love to throw in.
It's cool because you get so used to, I think when you watch especially an episodic show like TNG, you get so used to this is who these Federation officers are. Everybody on this ship is, for the most part, squeaky clean. They do their pillars of virtue. And then it's so nice to see like people who have honestly, there's a reason that Jellicoe was portrayed as a bad guy, because he was different. But by today's standards, he was a fantastic military officer, So it's, by I should say by many of today's standards, people go back and look at him and think of those. So I'd love to see how he would work in here, even if he had some difficulty, ordering the rest of the crew, Yeah.
He'd be an interesting one to design, definitely. I think my snap pick. This is not an obscure character, but it is a minor character. My snap pick is Morn.
Oh.
Like we're doing so much Deep Space Nine stuff. We gotta have Morn.
Okay.
And like we know that he's super talkative, so he's got to have like pretty high social skills. He's like pretty tough. Doesn't he like hide a bunch of latinum in his stomach for a while?
Oh yeah.
In liquid form. So maybe he'd have the ability to like, I don't know. They could do something fun with that. Maybe he could store advantage on his card. Maybe it's 3 hit points. I don't know. Yeah, he could have 3 health. Like, I think we could do some fun stuff with. Morn, and he's such an iconic part of, He's such an iconic part of the cast that like he would be fun. And like I feel like we could do a design where you actually just want to like park him somewhere and not have him do anything. Well, like he has some kind of ability that triggers if he's readied but unused. So you just like you want to park him in the like cargo bay and just have him sit around doing nothing.
Well,
I don't know. Or maybe
you do have a capacity, right? So maybe if he joins a team, then he's I don't know. But then you're using up one of your teams, and I don't know if he was much of a team player or a solo guy. But I love the way your mind works with that. That's a fantastic addition, and I feel like he could.
Or maybe he's really good when nobody else is around, like when he's off screen, when he does all his like exploits that we hear about but never see.
Oh, all right. I'm gonna throw this by you. What if he's in your flex pool, right? He's in your transfer pool. If he doesn't come out, then something happens. So you're incentivized to have him.
I like it. I like it a lot. Maybe Morn is our first officer who has to be in your flex pool.
Oh,
maybe he is.
Yeah.
Maybe Morn is just not. Maybe he just doesn't have a points cost, and it just says first line of text is just like you can only have him in your transfer pool.
Oh.
So he's just like he's a guest star. He might show up. He might not.
I love it.
And he's pretty. That could be
interesting.
I love
it. And you'd want him to have something if he did show up. You don't want him to be like the Jar Jar Binks, where he's like a negative or something.
No. He'd be useful.
Yeah.
He'd definitely be useful, I think. But I like the idea that he has an effect if he doesn't show up and an effect if he does show up.
Yeah,
that's pretty fun.
That's very, very cool. All right, so I want to talk about the community. I know you guys have been, you guys have been active. The community's been very active, and whether it be on Facebook, other social medias, or in Discords. Have you guys, I hit you with some interesting ones about some characters and things like that. But what about the community? Has the community had any surprises for you? I know, like, there's been a lot of suggestions and feedback, but like, has anybody hit you with any curveballs that you didn't expect?
Well, I would say like the communities. I'm not surprised that they're so passionate. That's just like gratifying. But one of the things I'm really thankful for is
they're so engaged and they ask great questions, even when they find stuff that's like, oh, I thought I had covered that. Like recently, I think we got a question about the massive keyword and how does that interact with projectiles, and it was we spent a lot of time thinking about the rules when we were designing the game, and so I was like, well, I'm sure that I covered that, that's got to be in the rules as written, and it wasn't. And so and time passes between the time you design a game and then you get a question like that, and you don't necessarily remember your intent. And so we really had to have a discussion about it, and we have an answer now that we're gonna put out there pretty soon. But the quality of the conversation the players had really in frames and informs like where we go with a question like that.
That's a great answer. Yeah, Max, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, we're always paying attention to what the sort of what the community is talking about, where the direction of things are, and we definitely think about like what are the needs that people are identifying as time goes on. We've definitely like had updates in our thinking about the way we design different units, about upcoming units. One thing I'll just say is we had a long time ago discussed having a neutral shuttle option, and we've sort of said we'll visit that when we need to. And we saw some conversations where people are saying, oh, this would be a really useful tool, and it's like, okay, well, let's loop back around to that and maybe think about doing that sooner. So it's not going to be in Glory and Zeal, but we've sort of said, okay, we know we've identified that, the community's identified that as a need. We'd sort of already figured out how we'd solve it if we needed to, and now we can say, okay, so like, yeah, let's create an option so that the Dominion can hire a freighter or whatever and have a little shuttle option, because some people are identifying that as like an opportunity for the faction and a thing that they're looking for. So we try to be really tapped into that. Things are moving at the pace they're moving, but we want to be responsive, and in things like good questions, we'll try to dig into that as quickly as possible. And in terms of new content, we're staying very like vigilant about stuff, and putting things into the pipeline, and moving things around as needed. So
excellent. Actually, there's a good segue. It's an elephant in the room question. It's one of the things that I hear from people saying is that they just wish that product was available faster and quicker. And when you look back when the game was first announced, there was a lot of expansions that were aspirations that everything would have been out much sooner, and so it has been slower, and I don't know, I don't think that you guys are definitely in charge of shipping or whatever, but what can you say to people that's one of their biggest concerns?
Well, the first thing we can say is we're still working on the game. We're still working on future expansions, so we've continued to WizKids has continued to be excited about that, which is great. We are too. And we're really pleased that people are hungry for new content. we've thought about some ways to try to get products that can get to market a little faster. We've talked about that with WizKids. I can't promise anything specific today, but we have very much heard you on that, and it's something we were looking for creative solutions on that we've talked to them about. We think we have some good ideas. So, it will just come down to the execution of that. And, a lot of the delays that definitely hit, a lot of it was global trade disruption. Beyond that, as we're contractors who are outside of WizKids, there isn't a ton we can say about it because we just don't know. But we're glad that people are excited for more content for the game, and we are excited to make it. And things are moving ahead. So we thank you for your patience.
And things are moving ahead, and Glory and Zeal is getting close. It is it's supposed to be out. I want to say this late summer. Are we still looking at somewhere late summer? Yeah.
That sounds right.
Excellent. So this isn't the last expansion that was even initially announced. There is also were other expansions, and I'm going to get to that in a second. There's two more questions I have for you guys. One is it's a question of scale. One of the things you guys have done, like everything in this game is pretty much to scale, and it's like it's a big breath of fresh air for miniature gamers and stuff and collectors too, who kind of want to see the Defiant be smaller than the Enterprise, right? But I wonder if that doesn't sometimes kind of creep up. Has this kind of bit you a little bit? I mean, for example, I think of, okay, we already have a Romulan in the game, right? At some point, we're probably going to have a Warbird. The D-Deridex class Warbird is massive when I look at it, when I Google it and stuff like that. Like, it was designed to fit the Enterprise inside of it and kind of dwarf it as one of those kind of pitches that they initially wanted to be able to do with it. Have you guys run into issues with scale, and can you talk about what can you tell us about any maybe troubles or hurdles you've had to jump through to well, you don't really jump through hurdles, hoops.
Jump over hurdles, jump through hoops. Yes.
Yeah. So it hasn't been a huge issue. I mean, there have been, like the best scale questions so far have been things like, okay, well, which bird of prey are we going to do, right? Because there's the Wumbo-sized bird of prey,
the Cavort
from Next Generation, and then there's the one that we all know and love. In the specific case of the Derek's class, which I actually really like the Romulans, and that's one of my favorite ships.
Mm-hmm.
We would love to get it in the game. I think that's a challenge, but it's not insurmountable. We want to adhere to scale, but I think, if you followed our careers, we've worked on other games that had other scale challenges and had something that everybody really wanted in the game. And I think we would not be above sliding the scale in certain circumstances for a unit that everybody really wants to have.
Okay, no, that makes sense. So Deep Space Nine, when it comes out, could actually be 150% size, so even larger, just to be
even bigger. Yes,
bigger.
No, the Borg cube, the Borg cube will be inflatable. You'll inflate it with helium and use a string on the base.
That sounds like a convention event where everybody shows up and we have like 25 people all trying to attack the Borg cube.
That would be pretty fun.
I'd love that. An inflatable balloon. Yeah. And you have to throw your ships at it. It becomes a dexterity game.
Ooh.
Ramming speed.
We're the kind of nerds who care a lot about scale too.
Yeah.
So, if adjustments have to be made to scale for logistical reasons, adjustments have to be made to scale for logistical reasons, but we won't do it if we don't have to. And, if it happens, it'll happen in a way that looks good.
Mm-hmm. Oh, excellent. No, I like to hear that. And I feel like also the original showrunners and stuff, they didn't necessarily have that strict adherence to scale. Sometimes it's like, well, the other model's broken, we have to use this one. And that's why we ended up with the Cavort bird of prey and the Burrell bird of prey and stuff. So
and the Cavort is in lower decks, so maybe someday Cavort, Bird of Prey, and Star Trek Into the Unknown. I'm not promising that, but maybe.
I'd really like that because I like the Klingons and I love diversity of fleets and stuff like that. And so they, especially when there's factions that you typically just like Romulans are notorious for having. In TNG era, at least, they were notorious for having just the D'Dera decks pretty much everywhere. But they do have more ships, and you do see them in enough places. But it's nice to be able to kind of diversify a little bit. Even though if you guys ever do release those, I'm probably gonna have at least 4 of them. So
we do see more good Romulan options too. There's a science vessel in lower decks. There's the Valdor class, which is a little bit more responsibly sized than the D'Dera decks. Of course, then there's the Scimitar, which is absurdly enormous. So, don't hold your breath on that one immediately, but who knows? Anything could happen.
I do like the idea of some of these bigger ships being like a one versus many, or kind of expanding upon the way that we're playing already. It's very cool. Speaking of expanding on the way we're playing already, there's one other thing I wanted to get with you guys on, and it's when you guys published the Sway rules, that was very helpful. There was another a rules question I had, and I don't know if this is still coming or if this is in the works or if it had been published and I just totally missed it. But it deals with like scaling up and scaling down missions. For example, again, a lot of these expansion packs have 2 ships. Are you going to play Cardassians again, but all as a match play when it requires 3 ships? I think we had talked about that being something that was going to be addressed. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so the rules for escalation and I guess de-escalation, running larger and smaller games, or games with fewer or more ships, should still be forthcoming. We don't know exactly when, but they are in the files went over to WizKids, and we have not heard that they're not publishing them. So I don't know when it will happen. Unfortunately, I can't give you a date, but
it's still planned.
It is still planned.
Excellent.
To our knowledge, it should be forthcoming in principle anytime. But who knows? There can be schedule challenges. There can be approvals challenges. You never know what can hold something up. It can be very arbitrary. Okay. So it's.
In the meantime, we'll just use our imagination and do the best we can.
I mean, so I will say, if you want to play it tomorrow, it works pretty much how you'd think it would work. You both agree to use more ships. It's not. There's a few edge cases that are covered in those rules, but pretty much it's an excuse to do what you want with your toys. And we definitely want to give people more support in that regard. In general, it's just like more options for, ways to play with your toys.
I really do like that. It leads me into a question about massive battles, right? Like for the war gamer in me that wants to like say, hey, I've got like 7 or 8 Klingon ships right now. As this expansion comes out and more expansions come out, people are eventually going to have bigger and bigger collections. And, there's going to be people who out there and are like, you know what? I want to buy like 4 more Birds of Prey and a couple more Vorchas. I want to build a big fleet and take up against somebody else running a big fleet. And of course we could kind of come up with ways to do that. Have you guys ever thought about looking into like supporting that as like maybe more of an official way to play? Because I know that's at least some people, and I'm curious how many people watching also are interested in trying to play it that way as well.
Yeah, we've talked about this. We consciously did not prioritize it so far because we wanted to create a game that wasn't battle first and try to get that experience right. We also wanted to give the game time to breathe in its releases, so that you could buy the game, single box, enjoy that experience. But we definitely have talked about it as the game gets, as collections proliferate and the game goes on longer, and we have ideas about how we would do that, because the ships are somewhat complex for a pure war game. So there are things we would potentially do, but we definitely thought about scaling when we designed the activation system. that was like a thought, because it's why it doesn't multiplicatively scale.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. Yeah, I could see. Yeah, if every ship had 3 officers, then even like a 7-ship game could take all day. Yeah.
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 And another thing too, I know that there's a lot of people excited for more sort of like focus on that war game side of things. And one good piece of good news I have is, as we move into the story arcs that are focused more on, sort of like the Dominion War as a hot war, we have more mission cards. There are more story missions and also more mission cards that are more focused on, sort of opening in battle. And so, expect to see more, start with more of your directives hot missions, expect to see more things that are sort of focused around, like, this is a wartime engagement of some sort. And we still want to keep the texture of the game there. We still want diplomacy to be important sometimes, sometimes maybe you start in a fight and the story turns instead toward having to collaborate on something, as we see in, lots of episodes where they start out fighting the Dominion and then they have to deal with some other problem, or but there's also opportunities for just doubling down on that. And so, our mission system was designed to be really flexible, and we really want to keep playing to that, but also give people more very thematic options for Deep Space Nine as it goes on, and we get deep into the, sort of the gritty days of the Dominion War. So,
no, excellent answers. Thank you, guys. I want to close out with a question looking a little bit more towards the future. The initial expansions that were first announced for this game included, of course, Glory and Zeal, and of course there was, for those of you who remember, those of you guys watching at home, there was also another expansion announced called Scars of Occupation. But it has been suggested that while this one, it hasn't been scrapped, it may have changed a little bit. Is there anything you can tell us about Scars of Occupation and what we can expect for the future?
Yeah, so the changes to this are honestly, this is less of a major overhaul and more of a shift in the specific content that's in there. As we've said, as we've looked at the line, we've seen how things are developed. We've written more of the missions. When we set out the original line plan, we sort of booked in a thing that focused on a particular thing, and we were kind of thinking, okay, Cardassians and Bajorans, and that'll be like what we want to do at this point in the story. But sitting where we actually are, we've come to realize, like, actually we want to focus on other things right now. So we're shifting that content. There'll still be some stuff in there that relates to those story beats, but it is going to be more focused on, to your interest, larger fleet engagements, to, like the sort of like strategic engagements of the middle and late war. And so we're going to focus a little bit on that rather than on this sort of like the ongoing power struggles of Cardassia to control Bajor specifically. Again, there will still be certain touchstones from those arcs, but we've shifted a little bit more to a little more of the battles we see in some of the other episodes. And again, that's just sort of a pacing change where, we had our plan at the beginning and we revisited the plan and we decided to change it. And so because of that, the title Scars of Occupation didn't really make sense anymore because it's not really focused on Bajor and Cardassia in the same way. It's focused more on other things, so it's going to have a different title. But to be honest, this is a change that wouldn't be visible at all if it hadn't been announced under a specific title. Like, we would just do this. If the title hadn't needed to change, if it had just been called like Big Battles in the Alpha Quadrant, then nobody would know anything was changing.
Okay.
We made similar adjustments in other expansions. So yeah.
I've heard that the working title now is called For the Glory of Crabbok. I don't know if that's true, but
no comment.
No comment. Okay, no comment. So it could be.
Barbers and battleships.
Barbers and battleships. Oh, I love it. Well, they would be effective against tribbles. Barbers.
True.
Yeah, barbers versus tribbles. That sounds like a really good. That sounds like that could be a whole separate board game. Let WizKids know.
We'll pass that on along to him.
Crabbok does kind of sound like a Klingon name.
It kind of does. Yeah, it was designed to be more of an ogre, of a brutish, kind of a crabby, a grumpy kind of name, and I could see that working. Maybe, who knows? Maybe one day I'll don the makeup. as my hairline recedes, I'm developing the real estate. I have the real estate up here for it, so it might happen someday. Well, gosh, this has been great. I love talking with you guys, Star Trek and all things nerdy and spaceship talk with with some of the greats of the industry. So, Michael and Max, thank you so much for joining us today. Did I miss anything else? Is there anything else that we needed to talk about that I skipped, or is there anything else that you want to add at the end?
Nothing for me.
I just want to give a shout out to our playtesters and the great community, and I'm glad we have people engaged, and it helps us deliver a better game, and gives us some people to try to deliver for.
No, absolutely. Playtesting is a lot of times they're unsung heroes of the gaming community, and they provide a very valuable feedback, because the wider community will completely tear stuff up if it comes out it's a little bit too fast. So, well, I want to thank you guys again, and to everybody else watching at home, let us know some of your questions and concerns down in the comments section below, and we will talk to you later. Be on the lookout for more Glory and Zeal and new articles and announcements that are coming from WizKids in the very near future. That's going to do it. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Big thanks to my patrons as well. May the force be with you. Live long and prosper. Be excellent to each other. Party on, dudes. And always wash your socks.